Feeling judged and making decisions based on what other people want for your life, maybe your parents or your spouse, an expert on communication and breaking the cycle of judgment next on the podcast. Hi, everyone. It's Natalie. This is a topic I hear many people talk about, and I don't hear many solutions or advice very often. So I wanted to offer someone who can help. We are products of the way we were raised. We may not like it, but we certainly are. There is no such thing as a perfect parent, but the way we react, the comments we make, the facial expressions, they all contribute to how we turn out as an adult. So we want to identify those feelings of being judged, and we want to be sure that we are not doing the same thing to our own kids. My guest today is Dr. Betsy Chung, a clinical psychologist with over 10 years experience as a mental health clinician. She specializes in helping people achieve self-esteem and healthy relationships by helping them make sense of their experiences. Today, we're going to talk about why we need approval even as adults, and what to do about it if you're feeling weighed down by that. Also, separating being tired from how we treat our kids, healing ourselves, but also making sure that we're helping our kids feel secure, learning to communicate and apologize to your family and your kids. Also, having confidence in your choices and teaching your kids to do the same. Thanks so much for joining me each week. I'm so glad you're here. And if you're looking for more topics like this, go to my website or my Instagram page where I have free downloads and tips for you. Let's get started today, everyone, with Dr. Betsy Chung. Betsy, this is a topic I've really been looking forward to because I have a lot of women in particular, and I'm sure men too, but for some reason women tell me this, that they are still seeking the approval of their elders or their parents. And I know this is something you specialize in, you spend a lot of time on. Why do we do that? And let's get into some ways that we can get over that if we can go that deep.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, one of my favorite topics. What I like to do usually when it comes to talking about our adult difficulties is I like going back to childhood because I really feel like I believe that everything, like we are all products of the way that we were raised. And this isn't just saying that it's all the parents' fault or anything like that, but those were our earliest relationships. And so, if you really think about it, when we're born as little infants, we are completely helpless and powerless. So we need to rely on our parents to take care of us and feed us and help us with survival. And so infants, all humans, we're born with this internal system that helps us, that warns us when there's something that is threatening to our lives. So if you think about it, as infants, our parents and our primary caregivers, they are actually our survival source, right? Like infants can't feed themselves. They can't, walk and take care of themselves. They can't do anything. So for infants, they need to be able to be close to their caregivers in order to feel safe and secure. And so when they feel any kind of a separation or maybe even rejection or abandonment or anything like that, it triggers these very uncomfortable feelings. And it causes us as little, even as little kids, to try to seek a way to survive. So basically, like approval seeking for little kids is very, very important because when parents show love, show affection, when they praise their children, those are all signs to a child that you're doing the right thing, that that your mom and your dad love you and will continue to be there for you. And so, when a child feels that kind of affection from their parents, they feel safe. And then over time, they're able to kind of do that for themselves. And then they grow up to be adults that don't need to seek the approval of other people because they trust enough in themselves. However, when children grow up being raised by parents, and this is a lot related to emotional maturity of parents, how emotionally intelligent a parent is, meaning that do these parents understand their emotions and how their emotions impact the way they act and how they interact with their children? So, for example, if you have a little kid who, let's say, was just hanging out at home and then at the end of the day, mom comes home very tired from work, if mom can't separate her own tiredness from how she treats her child, meaning if the child, let's say, is excited for mom to come home and mom's exhausted and she just wants a minute, but she doesn't know how to communicate that to the child. And mom says, like, leave me alone. Don't touch me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. The child, they're going to take that as a source of rejection.
Mm-hmm.
Like mom's mad at me. I don't know why mom is mad at me. So, that feels really uncomfortable for them. So it makes them really want to do something in order to repair that relationship with their parents in order to get to that feeling of security again. So really, when we talk about parental approval, we're really talking about how secure do I feel in my relationship with my parents, and how authentic and vulnerable can I be in gaining this, in I guess like being myself in order to gain this love and security from my
Yeah.
parents.
I have so many thoughts about everything you just said. And one is that as a parent, I want to talk about how we can heal ourselves, but I also want to talk because I often think about with 3 kids, I don't want to do that to them. I don't ever want them to feel like they have to seek my approval as an adult. I've done the best I can to get them into adulthood. So what I'm hearing you say is that communication and understanding, I've had a bad day. This is not about you. For instance, I just need to sit and have a couple minutes to myself, and then I want to spend time with you. Like, communication is really key. So give me some more tips as parents that we can work with our kids to be sure we're not developing that for them later in their life.
Sure. Yeah. I think that it's really, really, I mean, just even what you're saying right now, to be able to recognize that there's a difference between our intentions and what our children, take in.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to kind of recognize that is so, so important, because we might not be communicating very accurately what we're actually
Mm-hmm.
feeling. And so for parents to be able to even be aware, and maybe sometimes even walking away from an incident and maybe even feeling bad, right? It's like, oh God, I think that I just said something really mean to my child right now, and I didn't mean that. And to be able to go back and have a talk with your child and say, like, hey, I don't like the way that went. How did that make you feel? I'm worried that, you feel like you did something wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. I was tired and I'm sorry. I shouldn't have spoken to you that way. Right. Because children, they're always watching and they're always trying to make sense of the
Mm-hmm.
world. So
Mm-hmm.
if the parents don't provide them with an explanation of what's going on, and don't provide them with language or even space to kind of trial and error in communicating the way that they feel, then children start to kind of make their own sense of what's going on. And that almost becomes their truth.
Yeah.
So if you kind of think about even this example of a child that might get the wrong message from their parents, that might become their truth,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is that, like, I can't bother people. I don't know when it's okay to approach somebody. So in their adulthood, if they're in a relationship, they might not want to bother their partners. I don't want to burden my partners. I don't want to upset my partners if I need something. So I'm just going to try to figure out how to meet that need on my own. So there's just so many messages that we want to make sure that, of course, there's no such thing as a perfect parent. Literally no such thing as a perfect parent. You can
Yeah.
take even the most educated child therapist, and there's no such thing as a parent that's not going to make mistakes, especially that they also don't have control over what their children are exposed to. And
Mm-hmm.
so being able as a parent to also be able to trust that, it's okay to make mistakes, but self-reflect, think about how you're coming off to your kids, think about the kinds of messages that you might be sending them, and it's okay to correct those messages.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's really huge. Along with that, I guess another tip is it's okay to apologize to your children. I feel like, that's something that can be hard for some parents, especially in certain cultures. For me, for instance, I grew up in a very traditional Chinese background. And so it was really all about, the parents or the authorities. They're the ones that are going to work, taking care of the children. They're more wise. And while there is some truth to that, it's I think the part of that can be hard sometimes for children is that there's this belief then that adults are superior to children, that adults' needs are superior to children, that adults never make mistakes, they're perfect. And so when adults show up imperfectly, and for the children, they don't see that as imperfect, they see that as normal, right? Like, that's normal to be treated that way. That's normal for people to speak to me in a certain way when they're tired, versus being able to kind of recognize, like, oh, like, I don't like the way that I was talked to in that situation. And so no wonder I feel the way that I do.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Yeah.
it's more validating when parents are able to apologize and acknowledge mistakes that they make to their children.
Well, I think it's an incredible gift to be able to tell your kids, I don't like the way that happened, or I apologize. And that is not easy for a lot of people. But let's turn it now to talking about us as adults. And maybe we're just realizing, because of the way our kids are reacting, or maybe we're just realizing because you feel judged by a parent for a decision you made, either about, maybe it's your kids or the house you bought or whatever the case might be. I know there are people listening going, oh yeah, I feel like that. I feel judged, or I feel like I need their approval for all kinds of things I do. How would you suggest someone approach the parent or approach that situation when they are feeling that way as a grown adult?
Yeah, I love that, because it connects so perfectly to that topic of self-awareness for parents, right? Like, when parents struggle to separate their own perceptions and their own opinions and preferences with that of others, what ends up happening is that they end up expressing their opinions as truth. And it causes the children to really question themselves. So, for example, when I was already, I think, in my mid 20s, I was already graduated from graduate school. I was like, a postdoctoral intern, and, basically a full blown adult by that time. And I remember at that time I had gotten in a car accident. I've never, gone to purchase my own car. And this was the first car that I would have purchased on my own, because any car I had before that was, something that my parents helped me with. And so I remember that my mom, she, of course I was going to take her with me to go and buy a new car, because, my mom has always been that person that she's very, very good at negotiating. So I was like, okay, I'm going to bring her with me because I want to get the best deal that I possibly can. And so when we were at the car dealership, I remember that there were specific cars that I really, really liked. And my mom, at first she was like, yeah, like, I think you're old enough to, get like a somewhat luxury car for yourself. I was like, okay, cool. And I was like really excited about this one car. And then what ended up happening was that we went home, we thought about it, and I still was really excited about that car. But my mom was like, that car, it's a used car, and so it's nice, but it's not really worth it. Like, for the same price, you can get a brand new car, that nobody's ever driven before. And I was really disappointed, but I was like, okay. And so I ended up getting the car that my mom wanted me to get. After I bought it, I thought about, I was like, why did I do that? Like, I was paying for this with my own money. Why did I do that? And I realized that I didn't really trust myself. I didn't trust my own instincts. I didn't trust my own preference. And so, because my mom said, like, because this is a used car, yes, it looks nice, but it's used. This car is probably better. And also because she was going to be the one negotiating, I didn't know that it was okay for me to say no. Because, again, growing up, my mom was authority on anything. I trusted her on everything. So even as an adult, I was like, completely relying on her to make decisions for me. Even though, if I really think about it, if I would have told her, no, I really want that car, can you help me negotiate that car because I like it? I am pretty positive she would have done it for me. But that need for me to continue to have my mom give me that permission, it was because I didn't really trust my own instincts, because I I didn't grow up, with a parent that really validated the things that I thought was good and, made me feel confident about choices that I would make. And another thing that, is that, for instance, my mom, she kind of struggled with some anxiety. So whenever I would do something that made her nervous, her response would communicate to me that I did something wrong versus maybe being able to recognize, like, when you do that, it makes me nervous versus like, oh my God, what is wrong with you? You know better than that.
Mm-hmm.
So again,
Yeah.
all of these different messages that I would hear from my mom, when in reality, these were just kind of her perceptions of things and her feelings about things, because she didn't communicate to me that there's a difference between her feelings and the things that I do and the choices that I make. That's why I over relied on her.
Yeah.
So as an
So
adult,
many of us do. So many of us do.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because when our parents tell us that when they praise us, that's a sign that, like, okay, I'm doing the right thing. Right.
Yeah.
So if I kick a ball and and I kick it in the wrong direction, but my mom was, or mom or dad would have been like, hey, good effort. That was a
Mm-hmm.
really good effort. Then I would feel like, okay, I'm a person who takes risks and
Mm-hmm.
I trust myself to take risks but then if it was like, oh my God, you did so horrible there. What's wrong with you? You're supposed to kick it in that direction, not that
Mm-hmm.
direction. I might start to question my own athletic abilities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So again, like, just demonstrating like the kinds of messages that we received, whether it be intentional or not, we take it as, in our childhood as meaning like that's who I am as a person.
Yeah.
So I think healing as an adult really required me to be able to kind of like recognize that I'm an adult now. And, I have judgments that I need to learn how to trust. My decisions are reasonable decisions, even if they differ from my parents. And so as an adult right now, today, I actually still do go to my parents occasionally. And what's interesting is that I never even noticed that until my husband pointed it out. Like, I had a really, big decision to make about something last week. And my husband was like, did you call your parents? And I was like, I did. Do I do that? And he's like, yeah, you do. And I thought about it and I realized that I do reach out to my parents now, but not really for permission.
Yeah.
I reach out for them. I realize that I'm allowed to make my own decisions, but I like to at least incorporate sometimes what they think, because the truth is that they are wise. They have lived life a lot longer than
Mm-hmm.
me, and they have been through a lot more experiences. And so I'm interested to see what they have to say. What is your perspective? Are there any blind spots
Yeah.
in this
Without
decision?
approval, but with just input. Hey everyone, it's Natalie. I am excited to let you know that I'm opening up spaces for collaboration and advertising and sponsorship on this podcast and on my YouTube channel. If you're a brand looking to grow in the wellness, family, or mindfulness spaces, I would love to collaborate with you. You can find a link to get in touch with me in the show notes, and you can always find out more about what I'm up to on natalietysdal.com.
Absolutely.
Because you value their input.
Right.
But for people who, and I know they're out there because again, I've had these discussions with some of the people who listen to the show who've said otherwise, where I feel like I need approval and let's talk about advice for those people. And sometimes it's tied to something. It might be the will, like do what I say, and those are the horrible situations that exist sometimes for people.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you have for some of those people who are being judged and they still love, maybe it's a brother or sister or a parent or grandparent, and they are being judged and they don't know what to do about it?
Right. So again, I'm going to kind of like tap back into the childhood. So a lot of times, again, for children don't know that there are gray areas in the world.
Mm.
So let's just say that there's a child that, would cry about something. and the parent being frustrated doesn't know how to stop the child from
Mm-hmm.
crying, might reject the child. Like, I don't want to bother with you until you stop crying.
Mm-hmm.
So the child, what they take that as is, okay, then I guess I shouldn't express my emotions because then I'll lose my relationship and my closeness with my caregivers and with people that are very important to me if I show up in this particular way.
Mm-hmm.
And so these messages that these kids, that these kids kind of make sense of these interactions, if nobody corrects that, they're going to continue to operate throughout their lives as if they don't do what this person tells them to do, then they're going to lose their relationship with them. They're going to lose this person's love and affection. And so it's this belief that we hold on to that like we have to do this in order to have a good relationship with these people, in order to get good things from these kinds of relationships. When in reality, the truth is that most parents, they won't actually abandon their children, right? They might even, sometimes parents might even think that they will, abandon their children. But when it really, really comes down to it, our attachment systems are so strong that many times, when just because parents behave in a certain way, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to abandon their children. But again, if they don't explain that to their children, then the children are going to believe and hold on to that belief for the rest of their lives. Like, I need to be that way in order for my parents to still give me that inheritance. And one, I think, really, really important thing for adults to be able to do, actually, I have two. Number one is to be able to self-validate. Anytime that you have any kind of a need for anything, there's a reason behind it, a very logical reason behind it, right? So, for example, even going back to that example with the car that I wanted, right? It's true that, for my mom, she's always purchased new cars, and new cars do tend to be safer because that means that nobody's ever touched it, and, there's a warranty on it. So if anything's wrong, you could always bring it back, versus like an old car, maybe there's things that have happened to it that you don't really know. And so while that is true, it's also true that I wanted to treat myself to a nice car. This is going to be my first luxury car. This is going to be the first time in my life that I actually am making money and I get to choose something that I want. And that would have kind of almost been like a trophy for me, right? And so in this situation, if I would have validated that it's okay for me to want to treat myself, after working so hard to earn my degree, if I would have been able to validate that that's true, but also consider the fact, like, okay, like new cars, like that makes sense, but I really want this, then maybe I would have been able to kind of communicate that to my mom, right? Like, mom, I get it. I agree with you that getting a brand new car is probably more practical, but at the same time, like, this is important for me. This is kind of representative of me kind of rewarding myself for my hard work, and so if we're able to communicate those things in a healthy and positive way, then a lot of times we can also get that understanding from our parents as well. The problem is that when parents judge and criticize, what that does is it shuts down our own perspective of things. Right. So if my mom were to say like, oh, but that car is so expensive, like, no, that's not a good idea. If that's a criticism, then that's going to shut down any, idea for me about like, oh, but this is my own reward, right? Like, I'm just going to think about what she thought was best. And so being able to kind of like validate ourselves and think about, okay, well, why do I want to make this decision that's a little bit different from my parents? And to be able to explain that to them, that's one very, I guess, adult way of kind of standing up for what you want. And then the other part of it is, the other, I guess, like tip would be to learn how to overcome conflicts. Because again, as children, we do look up to our parents. We do over rely on them. So the truth is that they do have some level of, I guess, authority over us. However, when we become adults, we also need to learn how to start showing up as adults in our relationships with our parents as well. And that includes overcoming disagreements and overcoming conflicts in a healthy way.
Mm.
A lot of times we might throw adult tantrums, right? Like fight our parents and, and when we do that, what we do is we trigger defensiveness. And when we trigger defensiveness from our parents, then they're going to be defensive. And then that's going to trigger our defensiveness. And it's going to create what we call like an escalation trap, where like people, two people are just trying to win an argument versus learning how to effectively, so again, in that example, it's like, Mom, I really appreciate your advice and the fact that buying a new car probably is more cost effective. It would make me feel a little bit safer. However, this is how I feel about that. This is how I feel. And this is why I wanted the choice that I'm making. Right. And when we're able to approach conflicts in that way, a lot of times the other person is able to actually hear us versus being busy defending and, defending like our response back to them. Like, I don't want that car. Like, why are you always trying to push things on me?
Yeah. Well, and I think now with a 21-year-old and an 18-year-old, when they're able to tell me why they really feel a certain way after listening to my advice, I have so, like, as a mom, that makes me so proud. Like, you've thought through this, not what I would do, but okay, you've thought through it. You're making good decisions for what you need in the moment. So I'm always thinking as the mom and as the individual, and not wanting to, pass on things in our lives that maybe weren't as good for, generationally. Right. So I love that advice. And ultimately, isn't that what we want, is to feel good about our decisions and for us to have kids who make good decisions?
Yeah. I mean, look at what you're setting your kids up for, right? Because the truth is that, parents are not going to be around forever.
Yeah.
And parents aren't going to be able to predict all of the different things that their kids are going to be going through. So it doesn't make sense for a parent to force their children to handle things in a certain way if they don't know if their child's lives are going to go in that direction. So I think that the skill really that parents need to teach their children is to be good decision makers, to be able to, regulate their emotions and be in a state where they can actually consider, different aspects of a situation and reach out for help from people, for instance, right? Like, so when my parents aren't here anymore, I would hope that when I am confronted with a big decision, that I'll be able to know what kinds of relationships that I can trust to reach out to. So when I go to my parents now and they, it was actually really interesting because, last week when I reached out to my parents, both of them were on speakerphone. And even just hearing my mom say, I'm realizing that, it's not all about money. It's not all about money decisions in our lives. Like, you got to be happy, so I trust you, do what you feel is right. And, and I will help you. And I remember—
Boy, that's empowering.
Yes. Because, I remember that after that conversation, my parents didn't give me any advice at all, not a single piece of advice, but I felt so much more empowered and so much more motivated because I knew that if things got bad, if I became too overwhelming, that I can lean on them.
Yeah.
I can ask them for help. Yeah.
Such great advice and so many things to think about. I really learned from this as a mom and as an individual, and especially, and I know we could spend a whole nother podcast talking about just looking back and realizing why we feel the way we do, coming from maybe divorced families and then step parents and things that maybe changed the way we communicated or felt or looked for approval. And those are all factors in how we how we adult and parent later in life. I know
Yeah.
you love this stuff and you think a lot about this stuff. So
Yeah, I absolutely do. If I can even throw out another really important thing that I do with almost all of my clients that come in is I have this little flip chart that's nothing but feelings. I'll actually show it to you. So, I have this flip chart. And all it is it's kind of like that same thing that you might see on the walls in elementary school.
yeah.
And I feel like this is so, so important
And
because
say what those are, because some people watch on YouTube and some people listen, but I'm feeling disgusted,
yes.
uh,
So all of
ecstatic.
these are just
Yeah.
feelings.
Embarrassed. So is it identifying in this moment, I'm crying and I don't know why I'm crying, and then looking at your chart and saying, that's the feeling.
Yes,
Is that what that's about?
absolutely. Being able to to put words to
Mm,
how we feel on the inside, because our internal processes, those are very important. That's what warns us about things. That's what informs us about what's going on in our environments. And, our internal processes, we need to try our very best to align those with how we behave externally. Because when we don't, then we send all sorts of wrong messages. We react in ways that might not make sense for other people. And that becomes very, I'm going to say, lonely over
mm,
time because it feels like nobody knows us, nobody
mhm,
understands us. So something as simple as right now, I'm feeling very frustrated because, you just keep talking over me. That is very important because if we can't communicate that, then we might continue to talk over the other
mhm,
person. We might think that those feelings that we're getting, those very flustered feelings are anger. So we
mhm,
might behave in an angry way and accidentally communicate things that we don't mean to communicate and causing the other person to react towards us in a way that is not beneficial or aligned with what we actually need. So,
yeah.
for example, sometimes what we really need is reassurance, but the ways that we express those anxieties actually causes people to not want to be close to us. Right. Like, so for instance, like if we feel anxious about something and we, express, like, let's use jealousy, for instance. We feel jealous. That's the source of anxiety. Right. However, when we use anger to express those jealousies, then that's going to cause our partners to really push away from us because
Mhm,
anger is meant to distance, right? Anger is meant to intimidate and push
mm,
away threat. So when I'm going to respond in an angry way because I feel jealous, that's going to cause my partner to back off rather than being able to recognize, like, oh, in that moment right now, I felt jealous because my internal systems are warning me that, I might lose my partner to this other person,
mm,
and
mm,
based on whatever childhood experiences you had, that
mm.
those feelings of
All plays in.
be
Yeah.
a lot more
Yeah.
accessible, right? And so in those situations, rather than get that reassurance from our partners, like, I felt really jealous in that situation because I saw you talking to that person, in a way that made me feel uncomfortable.
Mm,
If we can tell our partners that, then hopefully our partners will know it's like, you're silly. Like that's just me having a conversation. I'm just a nice person, but I love you. And I would never do that to you. Right. So you see the difference, like being able
mhm.
to really kind of understand our emotions and behave in a way that is aligned with how we feel on the inside is so, so important to relationships.
And what I'm hearing as a theme is communication,
Uh-huh.
identification and communication, knowing why you feel that way, and then being able to talk about that instead of just shoving it down like so many people, myself included, do, and then wonder why we blow up or have an issue or whatever it is because we haven't dealt
Right.
with it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Well, a lot of deep stuff here in 30 minutes. So let's give people a little bit more information on where they can follow you and find you and learn from you.
Sure. It's been a little bit slow, but I do have an Instagram page, lots and lots of content about relationships and childhood relationships, how that affects us today. And so that's going to be on Instagram. And my handle is Love Always Dr. Betsy. And anybody that might be interested in working with me or seeing, what I do, you can visit my website at www.drbetsychung.com.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today and your insight. It's really fun to meet you and continue to learn and get better.
Thank you so much for having me.